I thought that's a research gap. And I also wondered, why would people be so aggressive? If a parcel wasn't delivered to their door, why does it lead to hundreds of others starting to abuse each other, starting to abuse the company, and then talking about completely different societal matters? The more we are on our phones and the more we use our phones to communicate with each other, the more a computer mediates communication, the less we start to emphasize with others. Analytic evidence we have in psychology is having been bullied. So victims, if you have been bullied, is the strongest predictor of bullying yourself. It's almost as if, as a reaction to being bullied, the easiest way out is I bully back. I learn to bully back, otherwise I don't survive.
So today we have a really special guest in the faculty, and we decided to invite him to our podcast studio to talk about a topic that's increasingly important in our lives nowadays. Today we are going to discuss cyberbullying. I'm joined by Dr. Jan Breitsohl, Associate Professor of Digital Marketing in University of Glasgow. So really nice to see you, Jan. We are really proud and happy that you will be the first guest who's going to speak in English, and we are going to have like first discussion in our podcast studio in English. So welcome. And your research focuses on topic of cyberbullying and online communities, so we are going to delve into that more deeply. So my first question, knowing that we have a limited time here, how did you decide to research cyberbullying topic at first?
That's a good question. Well, thank you for having me here. I started my research, my PhD, on online complaints actually. So consumers complaining about services, Amazon not delivering their parcels and so on. And then over time, what became really evident was that people became angrier and angrier, nastier and nastier. And a simple complaint could turn into something completely different. And nobody really looked at that because, you know, in the marketing and business space, complaints were as negative as it gets, really. There wasn't a look at what else happens after that. And so I thought that's a research gap. And I also wondered, why would people be so aggressive? If a parcel wasn't delivered to their door, why does it lead to hundreds of others starting to abuse each other, starting to abuse the company, and then talking about completely different societal matters? Yeah.
I'm going to ask some questions about cyberbullying, knowing the context of nowadays, the political field, what is happening in the world, including conflicts, including like brand rivalries as a whole. Is cyberbullying more related to individuals or maybe shaped by like platforms or brands? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously cyberbullying has a long tradition of research. So psychologists started to look at it mostly based on identity-related matters. So children got bullied for how they looked, politicians got bullied for their values, organizations got bullied for their activities, their corporate wrongdoing, and so on. But then we had this phenomenon where more and more children started to bully each other about brands. And there's an increasing growth of materialism in most Western cultures, if not Eastern cultures as well. So that's where I think this kind of materialistic aspect has become more and more prevalent. And a lot of people don't have religious values anymore in Western society. And they don't really associate much with family and so on. We spend most time at work, making money, building a career. So materialism and money and identifying with brands and material objects and the things that we own and comparing ourselves to the lives of others, which we call downward or upward comparison, that leads to an increasing amount of bullying. So that's, I think, has become a dominant driver. And I would argue maybe the dominant driver, given that most people on the internet come together in corporate hosted communities. It's not the private channels that cause the damage, it's corporate hosted communities. Yeah.
Why do like this, from the first look, like normal people behave more aggressively online? what suddenly changes and how it is like, maybe it's environment driven. How could you elaborate on this?
Yeah. So it started 1999 with a paper from Zula, and he was famous for coining this idea of a disinhibition effect. So he argues that the more we are on our phones and the more we use our phones to communicate with each other, the more a computer mediates communication, the less we start to emphasize with others. So we feel like we're talking to our phone. We don't understand there's a human being at the other end. And when you don't see the effect of your words on somebody through the facial mimics and even body language, even intuitively understanding how your words affect others, it makes everything aggressive, more aggressive. You don't get a feeling anymore how much harm your words can do. And I think that's how normal people, in an offline environment, they would never dare say anything, but online they feel it's a completely different space and there's no retribution. Nobody will get back at them.
We also have this like us versus them, distinction as a whole, sports teams, obviously the rivalries in variety of sports, football, basketball, you name it. And also like the brands like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, you name it as well. How does that increases like cyberbullying? How does it maybe different than maybe political discussions that goes through the internet?
Yeah, good point as well. So that links to the increasing amount of polarization that we see in society. There's a lot of literature on that as well. So you see it in politics. In the US, for example, it's very extreme. You see it in sports. Yeah, we were just hosting a conference on Tuesday before I flew here, actually, with all the big Scottish football organizations. And we have a very big football fan community in Glasgow. Where
obviously, Rangers versus Celtics.
Exactly.
Obviously. Yeah.
Exactly. So what happens a lot is that Rangers are having a discussion about the recent game. And then a Celtic fan comes in and says, well, good game, but as you know, we've won more titles than you have. And that, of course, triggers immediate heavy reactions from the Glasgow fans. And this type of rivalry, sometimes it happens innocently, but more and more we have what most people call trolls, people who go to a community to provoke others. No interest in the topics, they just want to cause a reaction. Yeah.
If some sort of small group creates toxicity, why it is so difficult to manage? Like it's only a small group. Why it's so difficult to manage this bullying situation as a whole?
I mean, it depends. Sometimes it's small, but what we see is only those people who post, or at best those who react. But really, behind any event are millions of fans watching. Liverpool Facebook page, they have, I think, 13 million followers now. So Liverpool could probably handle a small group of fans who attack each other. But they're worried about the millions of others, including investors, activists, the press, their own fans, families, and so on, players even. So that's why they're so worried. There's a huge public behind, looking at every single word that Liverpool is putting out there. And it's a big risk. First, to intervene, you have to agree internally. What are our values? What do we stand for? And how can we translate those into a way to tackle bullying? And that's a lengthy, complex process. Yeah.
We also have this like bystander phenomena. Those who don't interact, those who are not commenting, those who are just looking what is happening in online discussions, maybe Reddit pages, subpages, and so on. Do they affect this more negatively, or do they have like a more positive impact? How do you see this thing?
Yeah, good point. So the bystander effect basically says when something negative happens, when bullying happens, nobody will stand up, nobody will get involved, nobody will intervene, because there's a lot of other people around. So they delegate responsibility to others. Somebody else will surely intervene. So normally studies would show that the more people are present, the less somebody feels responsible to stand up to the bully and do something about it. However, sometimes when you are in a community and you know the people within that community, there are studies on social courage. There are people who are high on social courage, and for them it's an opportunity. They actually are triggered by the larger the group, the more they will get involved. But they're very rare, and we still don't know how can we generate social courage? How can we increase it? Yeah.
Let's go to the brands maybe section a bit more. Let's delve into the brands. Do brands that take like a social or political stances, do they reduce or actually increase the conflict? What's the effect in that?
Yeah, good.
It's
good.
like I've seen like plenty of examples that actually it raises the conflict, while it actually might be supposed to calm the tension between this section of people.
Yeah. That's a really good question. We've just done an experiment on that, and we were comparing brands such as Unilever who make statements about their values. And we wanted to test whether that can actually incite bullying. So let's say Unilever says celebrating Pride Week this month. And as many controversial, sensitive social topics, it led to thousands of comments. People were either celebrating Unilever for celebrating Pride Month, but there were also people who said, look, this is woke, this is not authentic, yes. What are you doing? Do you even have people from the community working at Unilever who's behind that message? So they were challenging it. And in the end, what we were trying to show, but we haven't analyzed the data yet, is that authenticity is a key factor. If we believe Unilever has a long history of LGBT pride support activities, it might do some good, but if it feels like it's coming out of the blue and there's no previous history, it might do a lot of harm, because it just feels like a big organization makes this hollow statement.
Yes.
Yeah.
What does like non-intervention in like discussions by brands and platforms signal to users and the people online?
Mm-hmm. I'm actually presenting this later today in my presentation.
I mean, we can have like some sort of sneak peek, like we in this room.
So I'm presenting another experiment we ran, and in essence, we compared non-engagement, a brand doing nothing, to different types of other interventions, warning consumers, stop it, or giving information to clarify that what they're arguing about actually has a truth to it or not. And we show that non-engagement in most cases has a negative effect on the corporate reputation, on well-being, on purchase intention. So it's commercially bad not to tackle bullying. That's the outcome. Yes. Unless the debate for most people doesn't qualify as bullying. If it's kind of joking around and the company misunderstands it and intervenes, that can be even worse than just letting it go and kind of going with the freedom of speech theme. Yeah.
But do brands and platforms maybe even are more incentivized to tolerate toxicity because of the engagements, maybe of reach? How do you see that maybe that actually helps them in the long run, or maybe even a short term?
I mean, obviously that's well known that the platforms actually make profit from any content that generates more and more clicks and engagement. So we know for platforms there's a profitability incentive. Yeah. For brands, however, not so much. For them, it's really, there's so many studies that show that their intention is actually to nurture a community where they can promote their products, they gain intelligence on what do people like, what do people not like about our company. And also a lot of their staff actually go to these communities. And so it's for brands, it's not really logic to foster bullying. But for platforms, that's a completely different matter.
How do you would describe, like in countries in Lithuania or even smaller communities, is cyberbullying like different or more delved into more like personal level? Because Lithuania is like a smaller country, that people know our political views and social status more. How does that changes the game of discussion and discussion culture as a whole?
Yeah, good question. So the degree of homogeneity, the degree to which people who are in a community are similar, reduces the likelihood of bullying. Because a lot of bullying actually happens from cultural misunderstanding.
Yes.
and different norms. Norms are strong drivers. So if we have an argument, you and I'm German, you're Lithuanian,
Yes.
We might have different beliefs about what qualifies as criticism
Yes.
and what would be a personal attack. But if we're both from the same country, when I argue with my cousin, for example, on Facebook, we are both part of a football community. To others, it may look like we're really aggressive towards one another, but for most Germans, that qualifies as a constructive conflict, and we actually appreciate it, and we have a beer afterwards.
And I'm actually like prepared my last question. We are really going through very fast, but it will be like the last one, and it will be like the most practical one, I would say. What is like the number one change that you would propose for the platforms or brands that should try to make to reduce cyberbullying as a phenomena, as an idea, as someone that, somewhat just creates friction in society? How would you like, what would be your advice for that?
Yeah, well, I think the most important is to do more research and to fund more research on the idea of harmonizing. Because at the moment, most funding, most research looks at what divides people and how can we get rid of it, how can we remove it, prevention. But the underlying societal problem that people disagree and instead of trying to find a consensus, they become more and more nasty and more divided. That's a much deeper problem, and I think that's the key thing that should be sponsored. Most organizations now, and again on Tuesday we had a massive debate about that. AI is now the new solution. Yeah, in every conversation we have to bring in AI. So a lot of football clubs, big brands, they use ready-made AI tools, and what it will do is it will detect swear words and certain language and automatically remove content. Now what that does is, and they can show you that these companies who have those tools and sell it for a lot of money, it maybe leads to more likes, yeah. It might lead to less swear words, but the underlying societal change is absolutely zero. So people who have racist attitudes, they have their comments removed, but it doesn't change their attitude at all. And people who go on the internet to discuss and to bring society together, that doesn't happen because you just remove opinions. And it will just lead to the internet being the space of positive, shallow, meaningless interaction. And actually there's evidence nobody enjoys that. So the current solution, especially AI, for me is the wrong way. And we just, again, we've published a couple of papers on that, but I've just had a PhD student finishing his dissertation on a more advanced language model, a bird language model. And we were trying to detect nuanced aggressions, so microaggressions. I'm not a racist, but, or sarcasm.
Yeah.
It doesn't, for a machine, for an algorithm, it doesn't look like it's hurtful. But we understand from context that it's sarcastic. And a statement that reads as a support for women in football, for instance, to us, if we understand sarcasm, it actually means the opposite.
Yeah.
So the tool can't detect it. So the key issue is we actually can show that these tools are not made to improve conversation online. And so the biggest thing for me is fund research into interventions that bring people together, not remove or divide.
Yeah. And the very last question, because, I decided to add a little spice to our conversation. Have you ever gotten into a situation where you've been cyberbullied? I mean, you mentioned before our filming that you don't really use it as much on your personal accounts. But have you ever been in this situation where you received some sort of aggressive comment, or maybe you were on the other side where you bullied someone?
Well, if I had ever bullied somebody, I certainly wouldn't say it in this forum.
Maybe,
but in general, so whenever you do research on it, you have to submit an ethical application. And that's always one thing you have to address. Now, what happens to the researcher if they get bullied?
Yeah.
Because that can happen, and so you have to cater for it. You need to know the support literature, somebody in the university who can support you, a colleague, and so on. So I fortunately have never had that. Most of our research is non-participatory, so that we don't post content to elicit cyberbullying. However, I had a PhD student, and of course he had ethical approval, it was fine. He was trying to interview bullies and those people who step in. And sometimes when he invited interviewees on Facebook, random people, he got bullied. Yeah, so he invited the bullies to interview, and the bullies bullied him. So that can happen. Interestingly, also maybe as a fact that the strongest predictor of bullying scientifically from all meta-analytic evidence we have in psychology is having been bullied. So victims, if you have been bullied, is the strongest predictor of bullying yourself. It's almost as if, as a reaction to being bullied, the easiest way out is I bully back. I learn to bully back. Otherwise, I don't survive. So, yeah, that's quite startling, actually. Yeah.
So it was nice to have a little chat with you. I hope you enjoy your time here in Lithuania and in our faculty, and I hope you visit us soon. Maybe even in this podcast studio. Hopefully one day. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much.